More than 59 million Americans voted for President-elect Donald Trump. Democrats today are trying to understand what drove these individuals, especially those in normally Democratic-leaning states, to the polls. States that have not gone for a Republican for president since the 1980s, like Wisconsin or the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I want to bring in Selena Zito. She's a national political reporter who writes for the Washington Examiner, the Atlantic, and the New York Post. And Selena, it's so great to see you again. You have been covering these Trump voters for months and months. Most polls before Tuesday signaled a Clinton win, but you were hip to this long before the reality of the election results came in. At what point in the race did you feel that maybe the polls and the pundits had it all wrong?
Well, I first got the feeling that this would go for Trump right before the convention. In my drive from Pittsburgh to Cleveland, I saw counties which had never voted for a Republican, let alone put signs up for Republican, have all of these homemade, not even professional signs, homemade signs, or the house side of their house was painted, and I even saw someone who had painted their horse with Trump on the side. And I thought, wow, this is, you know, completely different. We're talking about the Mahoning Valley in Ohio, which used to be the Great Steel Valley up until the 70s, and the like Erie County in Pennsylvania, which is never, like, since Herbert Hoover hasn't voted for a Republican. And then right after the convention.
What do you think the appeal was? What do you think the appeal was? Why were they so drawn to his message? Republicans have tried to get those voters for a long, long time.
Well, he had a non-ideological campaign and message. He offered voters a tangible benefit. This was a change election. People have been building up to this. You saw it in the wave election cycles in 2006, 2010, 2014, in the midterm elections. So people were unhappy. They kept switching back and forth between Democrat and Republican. They've been sending us a message for a while. But he offered that tangible benefit. He said, "Make America great again." And while people made fun of that actually meant something to these voters. And what Hillary's problem is that she ran on her resume, which ended up just being about the past. And people wanted to move forward. And that is probably the most key thing that these voters liked about him. And it's not, you know, these voters, it's not just the poor voter. It's not just the one that's been economically impacted by trade or technology. It's also the upper middle class and middle class voter who feels a sense of loss of power. Not power in the way that we look at it, you know, in a boardroom or in Washington, but power in that their lifestyle is going to be different for their children and their grandchildren. These are people that are not mobile.
And one thing.
Yeah.
One thing that you said that was so interesting is Hillary Clinton's ad strategy was to focus on outrageous things that Donald Trump has said. And she kind of ceded the populist argument to Donald Trump.
Yes.
You say that the media took Donald Trump literally but not seriously, while Trump supporters took him seriously but not literally. Explain.
Well, you know, I straddle two worlds, right? I'm out there. I live in Pittsburgh. It's right there on the border with Ohio and Pennsylvania, and you know, and I watched voters and I listened to voters, and you know, and when he would say something outrageous, they didn't take it the way we did. You know, as reporters, we're like, he says something, we're going to ban all Muslims. Well, we're going to fact check that and see if that's something you can actually do. They look at it as like, you know, he doesn't really mean that. He just means he wants to keep the bad guys out. And they didn't take everything that they said in the most literal terms. And I think that was sort of the disconnect between us as reporters and the voters. They kept trying to tell us those things. He doesn't mean those things in the way you see them, in the way you hear them.
Fascinating stuff. I advise everybody interested in finding out more about this phenomenon, perhaps people on the coasts of the big cities confused about how this happened. Google Selena Zito, read her writing. Very interesting stuff. Selena, always good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me.